why. This has been an emotionally draining 24 hours for all of us. Personally, I am really glad to be with all of you, with allies, with friends, with fellow fighters in this struggle. I think we need this right now. And I'm looking forward to this discussion with a really extraordinary panel of experts and leaders who can inform us, update us, and hopefully even inspire us. We are going to be pretty open about the good, the bad, and the ugly tonight, in hopes that we all come away feeling like we've got the latest information, feeling empowered to act, because there is an urgency to act. I do want to start by acknowledging the headline that we have to keep at the forefront, which is that there's every indication that once all the votes are counted, that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are going to win the Electoral College and will be inaugurated as the next president and vice president. And that is an extraordinary accomplishment. I also want to acknowledge, I think, the pain that many of us are feeling, because 68 million people voted for someone who is a bigoted, racist, misogynist, homophobe, corrupt, incompetent, morally vacuous narcissist. And it pains me that 68 million people in this country knowingly voted for that person. So I don't want to minimize either the good or the bad feelings tonight, but I do want an honest accounting of what we can be proud of and the victories we've achieved nationally and locally, where in New York, we took some bad losses and we had some big wins too, and we'll talk about that. I am really thrilled that with us tonight in this panel is Congressmember Adriano Espaillat, who deserves congratulations tonight, coming off a general election victory. And we'll hear from him in a moment, but I believe, Congressman, that you had the biggest margin of victory of any congressional campaign in New York State. Is that correct?
That's correct. We were lucky enough to get 91% of the vote. We do have to preserve democracy.
Yes, that's right. We're going to cue you first to talk more about that. Let me just quickly introduce our amazing speakers. I'm also thrilled that we are joined by none other than Luis Miranda, a dear friend and mentor of mine. He wears so many hats, but he's also chair of the Latino Victory Fund and has been intimately involved in national politics throughout this campaign cycle, not just in New York, but everywhere. And I look forward to hearing from him. I'm really thrilled that we are joined by Carmen de la Rosa, who also is coming off a big victory. She won yesterday re-election to the state assembly in the 72nd district. Carmen, do you know your margin? It was big, right?
98% of the vote, and I am blessed.
Well, that's like the Soviet Union. Okay, that's impressive. Congratulations to you. We look forward to hearing from you. I'm really happy that someone who I have incredible admiration for, just an important leader in progressive work in New York State, Stanley Fritz, is with us. He is the New York State political director of Citizen Action, and so has been in the forefront of the progressive fight. And he is one of the godfathers of the victory of the Working Families Party that has blown through the threshold. And maybe you know the final number, Stan, but I think we're going to hit 300,000 plus votes on the WFP line. Is that right?
I think we did already.
Okay, so that's big, and we'll talk more about why that's good news. That's probably underreported, and that you can orient us on. Amelia Adams is a dear friend as well. I'm so happy she's here, and she is a rising star in the world of political strategist and the principal of Adams Advisors. And unlike many of the other people tonight, she wasn't on the ballot, so she doesn't have an election count to report on, but you'll be happy to hear from her. Dr. Dara Cass, who many of you know now from national TV, from social media, she's really become one of the most important voices for science, medicine, and facts in this pandemic, and has fused politics with the fight to save lives in a really powerful way. And it means a lot to have you here, Dara. By the way, I don't know how much we can talk about her affiliation, but she is an ER doctor in our community. Can I say which hospital?
Yeah,
Okay.
you can. I gave them a heads up like I'm supposed to, so I can.
Great. Here, uptown in Washington Heights, Dr. Cass is an ER doc, and I think has an important title at the ER department. But here
for most of you guys, I'm just somebody that takes care of people in the ER. That's all that matters.
At New York Presbyterian Hospital at the Columbia University Medical Center. So she's part of our community, saving lives. And she was in there in the trenches throughout this pandemic. And maybe if we have time, we'll hear from her. And finally, we have one more really very smart and important panelist, Corey Teeter from Tolchen Strategies, who is an expert on public opinion polling. And so he may have to bear the brunt of our collective anger at the polling establishment. But we know that was really Nate Silver's fault, not yours. So I would like to kick it off, if you wouldn't mind, Congressmember,
Sure.
with your view, because you have a local and national perspective. Where are we at tonight?
Well, we're closer to the 270 benchmark that will guarantee Joe Biden the president of the United States. I think we're waiting on Nevada. Nevada will count his votes, and they're, for the most part, coming from Democratic area, Las Vegas and Reno. And so we're expecting that they're trending that way. Pennsylvania is getting tighter as the votes are counted. I heard from someone in Pennsylvania that was telling me that the votes were going 16-1, Biden, Trump. And so there's still lots of votes, 15% left, but several 100,000 votes to be counted there, primarily from the Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Allegheny County, Lehigh Valley area. And so that's not done. And I think a tight election, obviously, but we'll take it. And we got to make sure that we do better next time, that we implement the changes that need to be implemented. I think the Latino community is a very diverse community. It's not a monolithic community, and as such, it requires, and I think Luis could speak to that a little bit better because he's an expert at that. It requires a very specific messaging technique for each groups. You don't message to a Mexican American in Texas in the border the same way you message to a Mexican American in California, Dominican here, or Puerto Rican in Orlando. You don't message to the Cuban community or the new Venezuelan community in Miami-Dade County the same way you message in the Northeast. And so this is critical that we're able to navigate this, because that's a fast and growing voting bloc nationally, right? And if we continue to missteps on that, it's going to hurt us. And I think that's what happened. I think the party is not responding well to that. I think that groups like the ones affiliated with Luis have it down pat, and we should be listening to them on how they do it and adapt those practices so that we can, that Florida doesn't continue to be Heartbreak Hill. Texas, I think if we message right to the Latino community, we may be able to take Texas in the future. but we have to do it the right way, and we didn't do it last night that way. Unfortunately, we lost some House seats. We'll still be in the majority, but overall it's a Democratic victory, and we'll take the White House. We need to now heal as a nation as well, and repair all the damage that has been perpetrated against us and peddled against us for the last 4 years.
We have a lot of healing, and it's going to be a long road, but getting rid of that horrible person from the White House will be a critical step forward. I want to remind folks that if you'd like to drop questions into the chat, we'll try and get to as many as we can after we give a chance to hear from folks with opening words. Luis, could you give us your perspective, the national view of the Biden-Harris path forward, maybe the national view of where we are in Congress, or what you feel are the key takeaways at this moment?
We're at 253 electoral college votes, so we are much closer to the 213 where Trump is. Of course, that includes Michigan and Wisconsin, as the congressman said. When your strategy, which is President Trump's strategy at this point, it's to go to court, you know that counting the votes, it's sort of not working for you anymore. And clearly, since last night, when they began to see the counties where votes were coming, even though he was leading in all of these states, the undercount, those votes that needed to be counted were coming from either paper ballots, and we knew throughout that that's where the Democratic strength was. So Arizona and Nevada, quite frankly, are the easiest path for the Biden-Harris team to take over the White House. We're heading on both states. The votes that need to be counted are coming from the right counties in both of those states, which will make the difference. If we take those two states, we don't need Georgia, we don't need North Carolina, we don't need Pennsylvania. We'll get to the 270. It's clear that we took one electoral vote in Nebraska and one electoral vote in Maine, because they appropriate electoral votes by congressional districts, not winner takes it all, like every other state. So I think everyone feels very good about the trajectory of where all of this is going. And if I just say two quick things, one is we need to tell others that that's where we're at and that's where we're heading, particularly in this state where we will win the election. We know we're going to end up in the courts. So having a body of people who voted in this state who could actually check that their vote was checked in becomes important later on if there's court cases that are happening. And on a personal level, you know, I'm very happy that the Latino vote throughout the country went out in unprecedented numbers, and that certainly made the difference in Nevada and in Arizona, where Latinos voted overwhelmingly for the Biden-Harris team. We're beginning to see the trend in Texas. It'll be a couple of more elections, but that was a very, very red state where the margin it's no longer 2-1. And in Florida, No, we have done fairly well in Florida. The last cycle with Hillary Clinton, who was sort of a rock star to every Latino group in Florida, including Cuban Americans. So this time, Cuban Americans voted Republican, which is where we know that they're at. And by doing so, they sort of voted Republican around from beginning to end. And sort of then we have some casualties that resulted in not taking over the state house, in losing Congresswoman Powell, which we worked so hard for. But overall, Puerto Ricans in Central Florida overwhelmingly for Biden. So what I want to make sure we get, because I'm beginning to hear it, we lost Florida not only because of Cubans voted Republican, because millions of whites voted for Trump. So I don't want to be blamed anymore. Us being a small segment, the largest minority group, but somehow it's our fault that we lost Florida. No, we lost Florida because millions of white people believe that Trump was a great president, even though he was getting the state sick. And it's a bigot.
Such an important point, and you are absolutely right. I'd love to cue Stanley to give us a New York perspective, a New York City and New York State perspective on the implications and what we have to do next. And if you would also explain to us why the WFP victory is so important.
Yeah, thank you so much. So first off, forgive me, I had my wisdom tooth taken out, so I might be a little bit like muffled, I guess. I don't know. But we were hoping for a route. We didn't get that. That's okay, because it looks like in the end, Joe Biden is going to pull through. I think the big lesson that we had to take away from this is when Trump got elected, everyone kept saying, this is not who we are. Well, yes, it is. It is very obvious this is who we are. We're a country that is really entrenched in racism, xenophobia, and misogyny. And now that we know it, we have to do the work. We also have been a country and a political system that erases the nuanceness of Blackness and of Latin and Hispanic folks. We just do not cover it. We don't talk about it. And particularly the Latinx community gets ignored consistently. And as somebody who's Haitian, so I consider myself Dominican by neighborly way, like it's about time we start paying attention to that community and really understanding what they want, because the fact of the matter is Republicans are paying attention, and they were sending propaganda through WhatsApp, because my dad got that kind of propaganda and he was falling for it. So we have a lot of work to do, a lot of big lessons, but we also have the opportunity to learn from those mistakes. And in 2 years, take the majority in the Senate and reach out to our Latin sisters and brothers and get them on the right side of politics and make sure they're heard. As for WFP, the party for the many, I am very happy to say that we have crossed the threshold to stay on the ballot line, and we moved up from D to C. So you'll have Democrat A, Republican B, Working Families Party C. So it's the first time I've been happy about a C since I took intro to bio in college. I'll take it. But the party has consistently identified progressive candidates to run for office, sometimes candidates that were not able to run on a Democratic line, particularly in upstate New York. And we were not only able to protect the party, but also grow its membership in ways we had not done before. You're talking about Working Families Party members all over the place now, in Erie County, in East New York, in Troy, in Soundview. And now all of a sudden you have this new generation of people, Black and brown, people of color, LGBTQIA, who are in the party, and they're gonna dictate how the party moves forward. And that's something to be very excited about.
Thank you, Stanley. Assembly member, congrats again on your victory. It was a nail biter.
Thank you.
But we're glad you pulled it off. But tell us your perspective on what this election means for Uptown, and of course you have an Albany perspective. And it's okay to share bad news, but we did lose some state legislative seats as well in both chambers. Give us your thoughts on where we're at and what we have to do going forward.
Sure. Well, thank you, first of all, for putting together this very timely panel. It's an honor to be here and share with you all. I mean, look, I think that one of the lessons that I think has been learned is that in the face of reforms that have happened in Albany, through those reforms, we got early voting. I think that voter turnout is something that we must continue to talk about. The fact that people had the opportunity to go ahead and vote before Election Day meant the difference when it comes to civic engagement. I saw it uptown. The lines at 168 went around the block several times. The Armory was full every single day, as well as the rest of the poll sites. And on Election Day, I think that also minimized some of the chaos that we were expecting, and it also made people feel comfortable. So I want to bring it back to those reforms and understand that there are still things that we need to get done, right? Same day voter registration, and ensuring that we're encouraging the younger folks to also register to vote. I think that what we saw uptown that really was exciting for me was that young and old, everyone was engaged, people were passionate, everyone had a candidate. But I do think that there is a level of education that needs to happen. For example, I will tell you that I was proudly taunting the Working Families Party and saying we must vote on the Working Families Party. And some of my Latino neighbors said to me, I tried to vote, for Adriano on the Democratic ticket and on the Working Families ticket, and they threw my ballot away, right? And we had to explain, right? So I think that when we look at Latino voters, when we look at voters who have a need for language access help, we need to ensure that we have inspectors that are trained, that are culturally competent to the communities that we represent, that are inside the poll sites, helping people out and through this process, and also ensuring that we're targeting our messaging. I think some of what Luis said is crucial, right? Yesterday I was hearing the Twitter buzz around what was going on and just hearing the blaming that is happening. I think it's unproductive. We have to come together. I agree with Stan that the party is shifting, the Democratic Party is shifting. And I am personally excited to see younger women of color taking the lead and getting the credit for having been taking the lead for a really long time. I think that when we talk about the reforms that are needed across New York State, we have to watch the women of color and the work that they're doing. When I say that, I think about, Pam Hunter up in Syracuse, who's a sister who's doing great work up there, to us here in New York City, across the Bronx. Yesterday we were able to usher in a new Dominican woman, Amanda Septimo, in the Bronx, right? And so it's changing, but I feel that our community feels engaged and energized. One thing that I continue to hear over and over again as I talk to voters on the early voting lines, as well as yesterday, was that local elections matter. People are now starting to pay attention, not just to the presidential elections, but to local elections. And I hope that we can continue to capitalize on that momentum to ensure that we are actually educating our voters. One of the things that is coming up for us in New York City, as you know, Mark, is ranked choice voting. And I'm very concerned about how that's going to roll out in communities of color and Latino communities, how we are going to elevate the education of the voter to ensure that we are not disenfranchising people in that election. So I am looking forward to being part of the solution. But overall, I'm excited. We did lose a few assembly colleagues. Fortunately, we still hold the majority in the assembly. But I think the shifts that we're seeing in how progressive the people who are being elected are is a great thing. And we have been able to hold on to the state Senate so far. Again, a few nail biters up there, and we're still waiting to see how that turns out. But I'm excited for the future of New York State. And I know that election reform is going to be at the forefront of everything we do going forward.
Thank you, Carmen. We did score one big assembly win right here in Manhattan. We prevented the Republican Party from retaking an assembly seat on the east side, which would have been absolutely disastrous. And Rebecca Seawright, who's the incumbent and is just a wonderful person and a wonderful assembly member, has won on the East Side. So there's some good news. Dr. Cass, talk to us about what all this means for our battle against this pandemic, a battle which I think you know, and perhaps you can explain, is far from over.
So I think that there's been a lot of feelings of discouragement, especially around the idea that the Senate won't flip, the expectation that this was going to be a rebuke for, Trumpism, and that we were going to all come together with an overwhelming show of support, that white people were all of a sudden going to be anti-racist, and that all of a sudden we were going to come together as a country and just pounce on all of this. And it clearly didn't happen. So we're feeling very, I think, depressed about that we're winning by inches, right? However, just to put it in context, with the executive branch, we can almost unilaterally, not entirely, but almost unilaterally address this virus. And so we're talking about specifically communities of color, but really what we're trying to get economically, health-wise, within our healthcare system, the steps we can make with an executive branch that believes in science, that appoints commissioners to the FDA and the CDC that are appropriate, that make sure that our vaccine process is not just efficient and effective, but trustworthy, that mobilizes our Defense Production Act to get PPE into our communities and make sure that we have enough testing and tracking, that invests in our states, remembering that there's money that's already been appropriated to the states that has not been mobilized because the Trump administration did not want to give resources to states that he didn't like. And as New Yorkers, one of the things that we're dealing with is a deficit, for our budget, very much related to this pandemic, decrease in taxes, but also increase in costs. And with a federal administration that already has some resources appropriated, but more importantly, understands the importance of mobilizing those resources to states, there's a lot that can be done just with the federal government alone. The Biden administration has already formed a task force, a parallel COVID task force, with scientists that have done this job before, people that have responded to Ebola and H1N1 that have been working on COVID since day one. So I think that although this is a chaotic feeling, I think people are feeling, very mixed emotions. One of the things I think people can really hold on to tight is that for this pandemic and really what it shapes for inequities and the economy and all the other things that we need to deal with, we will get out of this just with the presidency alone. And that's a really, really big deal.
What an important point, and an uplifting one. It would be a miracle if this, and let's just say it's not going to happen. This virus is still going to be here on January 20th. And please.
Let's be clear, okay? We are wearing masks for the foreseeable future. We are going to hopefully have a vaccine in the next 6 months that we can believe in and start mobilizing, but it may have a lot of limitations, not just in messaging and community acceptance, but even in delivery and in, the operation. So there's a lot that we're going to have to deal with, and the Biden administration is going to have to deal with a lot of hurdles going forward, but we will be moving forward. And for the past 7-8 months, we've been dealing with obstruction and gaslighting and trauma collectively, and that itself will start to end.
Thank you for that critical point, Dr. Cass. Corey, we are happy to have your expertise. I think you may be our data and numbers guy here. Can you offer any update on where we're at in, it seems like Pennsylvania and Georgia are the two that are really most heavily contested right now.
Sure.
Can you give us a sense on where we're at there?
Yeah, sure. I think I'm probably, and my entire industry is about to be the punching bag for the entire Democratic Party for a few weeks. So yeah, I'll get into that.
We still like you.
As well. So just in terms of, it's kind of already been said here. I feel pretty confident that Biden is going to cross the 270 threshold. I'm hoping it's tonight, and we can get some final word on Arizona, which I think Arizona and Nevada, which would put him over. In terms of Pennsylvania, I'm cautiously optimistic that when all the votes are counted, Biden will actually eke out the state. It's going to be close, but you just look at where most of the outstanding votes are coming from, Allegheny County and Philadelphia. I think I've been seeing that Biden is in the 80% level in Philadelphia. So he's going to need to win around 70% of the, I think, remaining absentee ballots that are still out yet to be counted. But that's not really outside of the realm of, that's not possible. And it actually is in line with what I think we've been seeing so far the break look like for absentee ballots. And then, yeah, Arizona, sort of the same thing. Most of the ballots are in Maricopa County, which you would expect to be leaning towards Biden. And he has a lead there of, I think, over 90,000 votes right now. So it's looking good. The optimism, or the optimistic in me, thinks we are going to flip Georgia as well. And I would add that really what I'm looking at Georgia, almost beyond just the presidential races, if Biden can somehow flip that state, will that also bring Purdue below the 50% mark, which would then force that race into a special election? I think that one would be in December, and the Warnock versus Loeffler special will be in January, early January. But yeah, I mean, I think we've kind of resigned ourselves to the fact that the Senate is probably out of reach this year. But, you never know if you have two potential special elections that close to each other in that state. And if Biden could win the state, there's, you don't want to give up hope there. So I'd rather have two special elections than one there. So I'm feeling cautiously optimistic about the presidential race and where Biden will end up, maybe even around 306 votes electoral votes when everything is counted. Let's address the polling errors and what I think is going to be, something that gets expanded upon for months on end here after the election. Overall, I think that our industry is definitely going to go through some pretty big soul searching in this. However, just looking at what I'm seeing so far, it definitely looks like where the errors have been the biggest are in those states that tend to have significant populations of non-college educated white voters. So basically the same mistake that we saw in 2016, which is pretty surprising to me, because I know that the industry did quite a bit to try and calculate for the misses that they had, especially with that voting group. And yet clearly, I don't think a lot of pollsters have adjusted their models enough to capture the reality that those voters are extremely Republican, extremely conservative, and much more so than the polls were suggesting. That's why you see the final polls in Michigan of Biden potentially winning by 8 points. You had a poll, it was an outlier, of course, but not too long ago of Wisconsin, Biden being up by 17. And clearly those, the margins as they are now, I think there was a clear miss with that group of voters again. There's going to be more issues that I think we can talk about, and we'll see that we're going to have to figure out as an industry. I mean, just going it to a simple level, I think sometimes maybe we can overcomplicate things and maybe just not realize that something as simple as, a House district's partisan history could be just as impactful or just as insightful as a myriad of polling data. Looking at the House races so far, that's actually sort of playing out. I think just on a holistic level, maybe the polling industry sort of needs to rediscover the inner artistry of polling and just, not disregard the electoral instinct that makes politics, such a difficult and interesting game to watch. So the second point I want to talk about, and this is actually a data point that we're just seeing right now. I tend to have a healthy skepticism of exit polling. They can often change. They're not always the most reliable, and especially with this election where you've just seen such radical differences between the in-person early vote and absentee and mail ballots. But there is one data point that's just clearly sticking out. If you look at the New York Times exits, Trump overwhelmingly won with voters who said that the economy is their number one issue. And the last time I checked it, I think he won 82% of those voters compared to only 17% for Biden. And what that suggests to me is that the party as a whole is still struggling to come up with a clear, robust, and economic populist message. We do countless survey research, qualitative research, focus groups, things like that in every part of the country. And you see this with working people of different races, genders, across the urban, rural, suburban divide, that oftentimes these people are saying the same things. There's an economy that's stacked against them while the government is not doing anything to address it. And despite all of their differences that these people have, they share many of the same priorities, whether you're talking about good jobs, better wages, lower healthcare costs, a secure retirement, and just in general, building a better future for their kids. And they also share the same skepticism about politics in general. So when I see that type of number, it does make me think that while the unity message that I think Biden was really going for in this election was absolutely effective. I mean, look at what Trump has done. You know, it was a very good contrast for what his opponent was. When I see a number like that, it does make me think that we still weren't clear enough on the economy. We weren't making the inroads that we needed to. And I think you can really see that in what is, frankly, a rather disappointing performance down ballot. And so moving forward, we have to figure that out. We have to figure out how to deliver a more clear and concise, robust, populist economic message that people can understand, or otherwise we're going to struggle constantly. I think we'll see more nights like this. Mark, I think you're muted.
Thank you. We're going to dive into as many questions as we can from the chat and the Q&A. And so please keep them coming. There's so many good ones. But maybe we'll start out with one that's come up a lot here already tonight. That maybe we'll ask Luis and, if possible, the Congressmember to weigh in on. People concerned about Trump's authoritarian instincts, and specifically, as Keisha Smith says, what happens if he doesn't concede? And someone else asked about his threat to use the Supreme Court to block Biden. Maybe we'll start with you, Luis, and then we'll go to the Congressmember. Do you have any sense of can he really do that? How scared should we be of that? You're on mute, Luis.
Your guess and anybody's guess is as good as mine. I imagine that at the end he will. He is erratic, but really not crazy. And it will be an insult to crazy people to call him crazy. And I think that at the end, the Republican Party wants a future. They did fairly well throughout the country, and doing what we have done for so many generations, that it's expected. I believe that it's what they will do. I'm more concerned about sort of the next 60 days and what the heck they will do with whatever judgeships are left with our appointments throughout the country. It's whatever happens during the next 60 days is really what I'm more concerned about than him getting the hell out on January 20th.
Do you have any thoughts on that, Congressmember?
Well, the first problem is that he can't have it both ways, right? He cannot say, stop the votes here, but let's count the votes over here. The second thing is sort of like the legal aspect of it. And I heard lawyers say that in order to contest the election, you got to have the count. So you have to count the votes, and there has to be a defect in the law itself on how the vote was counted. So to go to court and contest that aspect of the elections. The third point is sort of like the running out the clock aspect of all of this. You know, for him to go, you know, as far into, you know, December as possible, and then there are implications there. So those are the three sort of like primary aspects. I don't think it's doable. You know, I think that I agree with Luis. I think that some high-ranking Republican leaders have come out against him on that because they want life after this for the Republican Party, and they really didn't do that bad across the country. Even here in New York, you know, I believe they won some Senate seats, right, out in Suffolk County. I believe that they took back one of the Senate seats. I don't know if we lost the possibility of a supermajority in the Senate that could also impact on redistricting in the next couple of years, right? So there's all these implications, but I think for the most part, he kind of have it both ways. He kind of say, count Arizona, but don't count Pennsylvania or don't count Nevada, right? He kind of say, stop this because the count had a defect in it, in the law itself, when in fact the count has not been completed. And then there's the timing aspect of it, the timetable aspect of it.
Yeah.
But we should not turn our heads to it. We should be watchful. And we saw what happened in Detroit, where they tried to storm the site where the votes were being counted. So this Brooks Brothers riot thing that they talk about all the time, Roger Stone and that, they're going to try to do this, but that won't work in Detroit. That won't work in every place in America. So they're putting out fires, and I think it's going to be very difficult because we're getting very close to the numbers.
Amelia, apologies for not cueing you earlier. I'm very anxious to hear your perspective. You're a political professional. So did you witness malpractice in this campaign? What do we need to learn as progressive activists who feel like our future is on the line? What are we doing wrong?
Well, first, I just wanted to say good evening, and it's an honor to sit amongst all these professionals. I actually would probably say counter that. I don't think I'm actually a political professional. I view this from an organizing point of view because that's all I know. And that's, as a lonely acorn organizer cutting my teeth, I really think that we did miss the mark. We may take the White House, but I think the way things are looking in New York State, we may be down to 35 Senate seats and for Democrats when we were at 40. Yeah, when we were at 40. Yes. So we may have a net loss, but I do want to make sure that everyone counts all their votes. In New York, thank goodness to all the reforms that Senator Myrie was pushing through. I will never vote on election day thanks to early voting. But I do think in the same vein that we got so much done, it was also something that was, catnip and demonized on these out on Long Island, both Nassau and Suffolk counties, where things that were right, bail reform, righting so many historical wrongs, were the same things that got attacked and targeted. And I will be remiss if I don't say that as a Black woman in America, it is extremely scary and painful to see that these very ideals that we are fighting for is the exact thing that people are attacking. The fact that people do not see us to have equal rights is the same exact thing that people won their elections on, and it's extremely scary. And I think that messaging is fine. Yes, we need to tailor messaging, but we also need real boots on the ground and organizing and actually talking to people and not assuming that it's going to get filtered down through a piece of mail or an ad on Instagram or a television commercial in 30 seconds. We really need to organize. And the WFP didn't overnight get to that number by, the next day saying we need to get this amount of votes on the Working Families Party line. This was a real ground game that happened. And there's so many things that I could say. And I think to try to answer more of these folks' questions, I do think that we need to really look at this in an organizing mindset. And Carmen has said it already, and I don't want to be too redundant, is that what can we learn to go into next June? We have, I guess, 8 months for another election. Everyone needs to know what ranked choice voting is. There's been a lot of work, but we need to do more. We can't just come out of nowhere and say we have to tell everyone about how to vote next year. We're going to probably still be in masks. We're still going to be in this pandemic. So what can we do right now today to actually make sure that this is successful come June.
I mean, just so many powerful points you made. But I also want to thank you for bringing it back to New York, because we have a problem here that voter turnout in national elections is generally really strong. But then when it gets back to voting on your local state rep, even city council member or other city offices, turnout plummets and engagement plummets. But so much of what impacts our life and will impact our life for months and years to come, whether it's tenants' rights, criminal justice, environmental issues, transportation issues, it is heavily driven by leadership in Albany and at City Hall. So I'd like maybe to cue Carmen and Stan on that, but Carmen, perhaps you first. You know, what's at stake for us now in New York State government? We lost seats. We still have majorities in both chambers, but you know, what's on the line for us locally in the days ahead?
Absolutely. First of all, I want to say that Amelia Adams, yes, 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 all the time, yes. Amelia, how I call her, that's my sister. Look, I think that one of the things that has been on my mind for the last 24 hours as I watched us lose so many seats, or are on the brink of losing so many seats in the state Senate, is the audacity of the PBA and the SBA to come out and dog whistle the reforms that, as a woman of color, meant so much to me, because I've seen what's happened to my peers in Washington Heights. And these are stories that are not, unfortunately, not unique to Washington Heights. They happen all across our state. They're the stories of the young men that when I visited Greenhaven facility, those men that were mostly from Brooklyn, mostly from the Bronx, mostly Black men, sitting in prisons across our state. Those are their stories. And we tried to right a wrong. And because of the actions of the PBA, the SBA, they really tried to roll back the small bit of progress that we were able to guarantee for our peers, for the people who have been languishing in prisons for generations. And, you know, at the end of the day, they still endorsed Trump, right? They still endorsed Trump. They still came out and flipped Senate seats and flipped assembly seats on Staten Island and congressional seats. And, you know, I often question what moves people, right? And I think that Amelia hit the nail on the head when she said, this is about talking to people in our communities. So when I think about what's at stake, I think about, someone asked, what's the future of criminal justice reform? It's about looking at those laws that have been languishing. I'm personally the main sponsor of the elder parole legislation. We're seeing how many incarcerated people are dying due to COVID in our prisons. We're seeing what is happening across this system, and justice is not being served. When we look at immigrants, documented and undocumented, in New York State, how are we fortifying the protections that we need if we don't have a Democratic Senate, right? If we don't have a supermajority in the state Senate as well? How do we fortify those rights? When it comes to women's rights, when we know that there are courts that are looking to roll back the rights of women, how as a state do we step up boldly to say that, you know, we have to be that armor of protection for the women of our state? And now that we're in a fiscal crisis, I'm going to talk about the billionaires tax. How do we raise revenue to ensure that we're putting the pieces back together again so that our families can have a just recovery from COVID? And I think that those are some of the hot button issues that we'll be hearing about. Climate change. How do we protect New York State in this time, right? And so I'm looking forward to going back to Albany, to starting to delve into some of those hard issues. But I've always said that the state has a responsibility and has the authority to act, even when, you know, we're dealing with a Trump administration. We have to use the powers of the state as a firewall for our communities. And I think that that's what's at stake right now. We need leaders that are willing to step up be bold, be courageous, and make sure that we are defending our people.
My goodness, another really powerful set of statements. Thank you, Carmen, for that. Stanley, you're another leader, organizer at the New York State level. What lies ahead for us, considering a tougher landscape in Albany? What can we do to continue to push forward on social, economic, racial justice, city and statewide, whether or not we have allies in Washington?
So first off, just shout out to the Assemblywoman again, because she definitely put her foot all up in that answer, and I appreciate it. Much respect. Secondly, let's be very clear about like why we're in this situation, because Andrew Cuomo put in a rule that helped to preoccupy the working families parties for much of the election season, and we couldn't put our energy and resources towards candidates who deserved our support and attention. Having said that, I think that the Senate Democrats are going to be much better off than it seems right now once those absentee votes are counted. I think we take back 3 or 4 seats. And if I'm wrong, I will buy one person half a cup of coffee from the chip. And you can even add some oat milk in there, because balling. So like let's hold off on that just for the moment. But that's the big thing. The other big truth that folks are uncomfortable with, and I mentioned it when I first spoke, is that white supremacy still rules the day. So people might not think that they're racist, but they definitely support white supremacist policies. And we saw that because the police department, the District Attorney Association, the corrections associations teamed it together and made a racist Voltron to push back against the bail laws and to push back against laws that directly benefit Black and brown people, but poor people. The people in upstate New York, in towns like, I don't know, California, New York, who people are getting arrested and thrown in jails for no reason, and no one cares, because who has ever heard of California, New York? Right? The people who are in the Bronx and they're being harassed by the police, those are the folks who are being attacked when the police department goes after these laws. And these votes say that folks either aren't sure what's going on, but they're comfortable with the rhetoric that the other side uses, or they do know what's happening and they don't care. That's fine. That shows to me that it is very important that we do deeper and more intentional organizing. That means we got to go into those majority white communities and have conversations with them and help them understand how white supremacy hurts them too, hurts them even more sometimes. And we got to make sure we're having conversations with Black men and Latinx men, talking to them about misogyny and patriarchy, because I can almost guarantee you that's a big part of why so many of them voted for Trump and voted for other Republican candidates, because they see this behavior that Trump shows off, the behavior of Patrick Lynch from the PBA, and they think it's appropriate, they think it's manly, and it's not. So we have a lot of work to do, but we can definitely get there. Moving forward with the criminal justice stuff, listen, I'm not gonna lie to you, it's not gonna be an easy road. It wasn't an easy road this past session. But the fact of the matter is there are a lot of people who really give a damn about this. And when the NYPD and all the PDs were at the Capitol with their MAGA hats and their police badges saying that we had to repeal the law, you had folks like the Assemblywoman right there on the $1 million staircase saying, no, we're not gonna do it. And as long as we have folks like that, I feel very confident about our chances to get things done.
Thank you, Stan. I think we're going to lose Luis Miranda in a minute, and if you have to hop off, we understand. But do you have time for just a final thought or two for us? Perhaps marching orders, a view of the road ahead. What do you want? What do you want our takeaway to be, Luis?
I agree with everyone. Now we could put the national on the side. We didn't get the Senate. We continue to get Congress and the White House. And really, at the end of the day, all politics are local. So we need to focus on the state. When I woke up this morning and saw the state of New York all red, except the urban areas, it sort of taught me that I'm gallivanting through the world, talking about how we need to elect progressive candidates. I see the state where I reside that has some blue dots in a sea of red, and I think the congressman was the one who said, carrying more than 40% of the vote. Trump carrying more than 40% of the vote throughout the state. So we need to fight at home so that the very progressive state begins to look a little more like what I saw when I saw the map in California, that the North Carolina map, it's more blue than New York.
Yeah, I have to also get going.
Please, Congressman.
But, you know, Luis, I have a brother, as you know, that lived in Pennsylvania and now lives in South Jersey. He lived in Pittsburgh, and he often tell me Pennsylvania was Pittsburgh and the Allegheny area, Philadelphia, and the rest of it was Alabama. And so, you know, it proves to be, we got a lot of work to do right here at home, man. Ranked choice voting is important next year, because I think that communities of color need to be educated about ranked choice voting. Otherwise, it becomes almost a tool that will disenfranchise communities that have been traditionally excluded. And finally, you know, we begin to see the city shape up and government in the city look a little bit more like what the city is made up of, the composition of the city. But we must ensure that ranked choice voting benefits all New Yorkers, and not just one particular neighborhood or one particular group. So I think we have to educate the public, and we have you know, we all felt that we relied on the traditional polls that were out there. You know, I know, like the day before election, there was one poll, a Quinnipiac poll that came out that just blew Trump out the water. And I said, wow, this is unbelievable, right? I said, look, you know, we're winning Florida and we're winning all these other states. I mean, with comfortable margins, and then this happens, right? And so we have to reassess our ground game and not necessarily rely on polls that are often wrong, and try to ensure that people are educated on the issues, right? And that people are not necessarily voting for the bravado or the machismo that they see in a particular candidate, but the substance and what that person is doing to you or against you or for you, and try to vote, try to educate the voters to do the right thing by their interests as constituents, as customers of government. So thank you, Mark, for having this discussion. I think it was very timely. And thank you all the participants for contributing to this very healthy discussion. God bless
Thank you, Congressman.
Yeah.
Thank you, Congressmember. We know you have to run, and we are going to wrap up soon. But I want to cue Dara, Amelia, and Corey. Dr. Cass, no matter what, we're stuck with this president until January 20th, and that might end up being one of the toughest periods for us in this pandemic because of the winter and other factors nationally, but also the virus is on the rise in New York City and New York State. And we can't afford to walk away from that fight and just wait until Joe Biden and Kamala Harris come to the rescue in 2.5 months. So what can we do? What can we fight for locally to protect us, to protect our communities, to prevent another horrible round of deaths locally?
So first and foremost, we have to be responsible for ourselves and our communities. And that means if you see somebody in your community who doesn't want to wear a mask, or you know somebody that's been exposed, potentially positive, please encourage and support them to stay home and quarantine. Where it is getting harder and harder to convince people to isolate and quarantine when they're exposed because they're tired. It's the winter. It sometimes is complicated with childcare or with work, with getting resources like food. So really it's about supporting the community, because it's not about the few cases we have now. They're going up. We know that. It's about once community spread starts, it's stopping that kind of fire from the catching of the fire amongst communities, especially in intergenerational households. So it's about knowing your community, knowing how to help out, knowing who needs your resources, whether it's just time or support. The other thing is just please don't give up. Don't get tired. This is an exhausting time. It's going to get worse nationally. We're going to see horrific numbers. New Yorkers have shown up in a way through this pandemic that is a lesson to the country that they didn't learn. And we will continue to show the world that we can do this, if not with them, then for them. And I think that we need to remember that even in the face of a despair after an election or frustration with even our local politicians or our governance, that we have done better than anybody else in this pandemic. And we can continue to do that until we get the resources and the encouragement from the federal government that we need, which will hopefully happen in January.
Yeah, it's a little nerve-wracking. Sorry.
No, it's okay.
Please.
No, I think,
Really?
Stay vigilant is definitely a good word of advice. And I do want to caution people to not be distracted, because we're going to be in a long haul. We're still counting that. We haven't even started counting ballots in New York State. I guess it's going to start next week. And I really
the absentee ballots, right?
Yeah. I'm
exactly.
Personally worried about, come January, when the moratorium for evictions ends. What are we going to do? What's going to happen in that limbo time where thousands of people, not even just in New York City, across the state, may be facing an eviction, and there's still this government in place who does not want to give us any relief whatsoever. So I'm just, Carmen has a big burden to carry when she goes back. Hopefully they'll go back, at some point before the end of the year, and really try to hold on and to what the little gains that we made in the state. It's just a little nerve-wracking. And I do think that New York has been really good about, social distance and protecting one another. But I'm just a little worried in this limbo between votes being counted and inauguration, that there's so much going to be happening.
I'm worried about that as well. Corey, you talked about the Democratic messaging failure on economic issues. Give us some marching orders. What do we got to do better on messaging on COVID, on other factors which should have determined this election and clearly didn't?
Well, let's start with COVID. I mean, I don't want to see Democrats get discouraged to the point where they're afraid to run on their ideas. I mean, just, we did some polling for the Southern Poverty Law Center early in the summer on the HEROES Act, right after it was passed by the House, and it showed just overwhelming majorities of Americans of every race, across gender, across the partisan divide, supported that specific act. We listed it out, all of the things that were, part of that act. And, we're going to see the same type of obstruction we would expect from Mitch McConnell, I'm sure. I just don't want to see Democrats, lay down and take that. The intersection between the COVID crisis and an economic, message, it's there for the taking. And so, if we're going to face divided government, I just really want to see Democrats push that message, push these ideas that are overwhelmingly popular, and don't be afraid to moderate. When Democrats fight for their ideas, they generally win. What I said earlier was that the populist messages do tend to work the best. They really do tend to resonate with voters across different spectrums. And sometimes I just feel that the Democrats' worst enemy is themselves, or, they get too afraid to argue their ideas. And I just desperately don't want to see that, even in a divided Washington. And hopefully, the need that's out there around the country for an urgent response to this crisis can be a good catalyst to make them do that.
Well, amen to that. It would be a tragedy if the lesson we learned in this election is walk away from big ideas.
Absolutely.
Walk away from progressive values. That is the opposite of the lesson we need to learn. We know who we are. We know what we have to fight for. We know what's at stake. for our communities, for our city, for our state, for our country. And we have to ramp up that fight even further. We can't be discouraged, as Dr. Cass says, not in the fight against the pandemic, not in the fight against Donald Trump and his minions, not in the fight against our opponents in Albany, because the stakes are life and death. I have to say that I have gotten a jolt of confidence from this discussion. It's a reminder of why we're in this fight and what we can do together. I wish we had hours more. We're unfortunately over time, but I want to thank this incredible group of panelists. Thank you, Assemblymember de la Rosa. Thank you, Stan Fritz. Thank you, Dr. Cass. Thank you, Amelia Adams. Thank you, Corey Teeter. And of course, thanks to the Congressmember and Luis Miranda for joining us, for your wisdom at this hour when we so desperately needed it. And thanks to all of you who have joined us in this conversation. Keep up the fight, keep up hope. We are going to win the presidency, and we are going to continue to push forward for the good of our people. Thanks, everybody, and be safe.